Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. It is a freaking hot one in California right now. I believe we're not at the peak, but 108 degrees it's going to be today, probably about an hour from now. So I bet it's already over 100. But today is a big day in the history of professional wrestling. It is not looked upon as like a real big title change or something that monuments in history, like the formation of the Nexus or the NWO or something like that. But to me, honestly, we just went through the death of WCW with the Vice docuseries that went down thanks to The Rock. But they sort of touched on what happened to the people of WCW once WCW closed. And I think that honestly, WCW, when it was purchased by WWE, the real plan was for it to be its own brand, its own company. I'm sure there would be a little bit of merging along the way. But I honestly think what it was going to be was the second brand for WWE. They were going to continue on with WCW. They were going to run it a lot like the Raw and SmackDown brand. I think that they really wanted to have WCW to have its own television. I don't think they were going to give it SmackDown. I'm not really sure if the plan was for WWE maybe to have two shows, WCW have one show. But, they really had plans of going out and having their own tour dates, their own tour schedule, and running WCW much like a second brand, much like, Raw, SmackDown, they have NXT now. At one point, they had the ECW brand. I think it was going to be a lot like that. But one night on Monday Night Raw killed it. And that match happened in Seattle. It happened on this day in history. It was Buff Bagwell challenging Booker T for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. This was the first match that WWE was going to run under the WCW brand. They did everything to roll it out. They had basically Shane McMahon being the owner of the company. They had Scott Hudson and Arn Anderson come over and take over the announcing roles for the match. And basically, they went out there and they had a stinker of a match. I do know that the WCW guys that were bought under the Turner deal when they purchased contracts they weren't in developmental, but they were basically somewhere training together. I don't know why Booker T and Buff Bagwell didn't kind of like rehearse their match more to get it like packed in, a lot like how NXT do with the Performance Center. That's why a lot of these takeover matches are really, really good, because these guys they're in the lab and they're working to perfect this match. And some stuff always happens, and it doesn't. They're not following a script basically as it goes. Sometimes you have to read the crowd and see what they want, but they're able to know that I'm gonna do this, you're gonna do that, blah 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 blah. They kind of like the insides of wrestling that a guy like me doesn't really want to think about, but we know that basically, these guys are telling each other what they're going to do. We know that these guys were in training together because of the story that came out about Buff Bagwell and Shane Helms basically getting in a fight inside of the ring. Both guys have talked about it on shoot interviews, where basically, Shane thought that, Buff, big timed him and hit him with a shot, and Shane gave him a huge receipt, where basically Buff Bagwell got split open. They covered for each other. They basically, decided at that point that it was over and they didn't want to be the new guys on the roster basically getting in a fight inside of the ring. You know, that's a bad look that everybody wants. So basically, you know, Buff just said that he slipped in the ring, he hit the back of his head, and that's why he was bleeding. And nobody knew the story until it got out with the shoot interviews. But, you know, the story has come out. You know, they make a lot of excuses. They point a lot of fingers. There's some people who say that Lance Storm was actually supposed to have the match against Booker T because they knew that it was going to be a really good, a good technical wrestling match, but they ended up changing their mind at the last moment to put like a more charismatic Buff Bagwell. I am the biggest Buff Bagwell apologetic person that there is in the world. I loved Buff when he was in WCW. I loved him even more when he joined the NWO, and he was able to add a little bit more to his character, where he was, you know, able to come out as like the huge baby face, or I'm sorry, the huge heel who thought he was like the biggest guy in the room. Always had an excuse when he lost, and basically never, you know, backed down from anybody because he thought he was the baddest guy out there. I thought that he was a good enhancement to Scott Steiner, but we never got them blowing up at each other. We never got to have, you know, their sort of like, they weren't really a tag team. You know, Buff was like his roadie to Jeff Jarrett. We never got to see Buff, you know, turn against him, even if he would have lost the match, because I really feel that if WCW was open for another year or two, I think that Buff Bagwell would have become a World Heavyweight Champion. I really thought that he was one of the total packages. But when it comes down to this match, I always, you know, it's never really said anywhere. I don't think the match is as bad as people make it out to be. And people, you know, we'll get into that in a minute, but you know, people sort of like point fingers that, you know, it was because they were in Seattle. That wasn't WCW country. Why didn't they wait until, you know, it was kind of in the hometown of Buff Bagwell, hometown of WCW, when they were in Atlanta, which wasn't that much longer. I don't think that, you know, counts. WCW was a really big company. They had a really big boom with the NWO and Sting. I know that they ran a pay-per-view in Seattle. When you think of WCW, you don't really think of Seattle as being a big city, but they had their time when Seattle cared about WCW, and I don't think that basically they were just ready to shit on it because it was WCW instead of WWE. It was still Monday Night Raw. It was still a takeover. It was a part of an invasion storyline. I'm sure that a lot of people there in Seattle were thinking that, you know, this is probably a night that a lot of people are going to remember because it is the first night of WWE/WCW. I just think that the match that happened in the ring just wasn't up to par with a Stone Cold Steve Austin, a Kurt Angle. At that time, Triple H wasn't around. Undertaker, something like that. It just didn't have huge highlights. If it was a match that wasn't the main event, maybe it wouldn't have had, you know, this lasting remembrance of being one of the worst matches of all time. I'll tell you this much. Atlanta, when I lived there, I went to some ECW house shows. I went to an ECW TV taping. They toured through Georgia. They would normally go to 2 cities. I don't think of it, you know, ECW as an Atlanta town. When Atlanta hosted Monday Night Raw, it was the first night of the ECW invasion. They had the tag match, where basically all of the WWE guys that were once ECW guys all turned on Kane and Jericho. Rob Van Dam, as well as Tommy Dreamer, made their WWE debuts where they jumped the rail, and they joined as a part of the invasion. That was fucking awesome. And the people in Atlanta went fucking wild for ECW because it wasn't the main event of the show. It wasn't the exclamation point of everything that was going to happen that night. I don't know. I've always wondered what if. As of right now, everything that you read basically says that that match didn't go up to par. You know, Meltzer shit on it, the fans shitted on it, and then basically WWE canceled all their plans of having the WCW be its own brand, be its own television. It didn't think that it was going to be able to survive. I think if it was just on a different time slot on the card, it would have gotten over. It would have gotten huge. I think it would have been fun for them to run with two brands. I don't know if they just would have had like WCW Monday Raw, and then they would have had freaking WWE SmackDown, have the SmackDown show. I'm not really sure, but it would have been their dream of actually able to run two different brands, two different shows, and I'm sure there would have been some sort of crossover come WrestleMania or something like that, but they would have been able to treat it differently and probably get different revenue streams from different sponsorships and things like that. But when I look back on Booker versus Buff, I don't think it's the worst match of all time. I'm the biggest Buff, supporter. Buff, of course, would wrestle this match on Monday. He would show up on SmackDown. He would be a part of helping Kurt Angle and Stone Cold Steve Austin jump the WCW Invasion guys, throw them out of the arena, and then, of course, Stone Cold Steve Austin, DTA, don't trust anybody, hits the stunner on Buff. He throws them out of the arena, and that's the last time Buff is ever seen on WWE TV. I don't know. I think that Buff was just in a bad spot. We all know about the problems that Buff has had, and of course, if you think about the Heat Seekers DVD that had Jim Ross on it from the Legends Roundtable, I think is what it was. JR's talking about that when Buff didn't want to show up to work, he didn't call in. He had his mom call in, Judy Bagwell, getting on the phone saying Buff's not feeling well. He's not ready to come to work today. I don't think that's going to work anywhere. I don't think I could have my mom call in for me at my job. And I don't even work for freaking WWE. I work for a meat department at a grocery store. That doesn't really make sense. So, I just don't think Buff was ready for WWE. I don't think that he still thought that he was, in WCW where nobody was really his boss and he can do whatever he wanted to do. And he paid for it. We got his runs in TNA as Marcus Bagwell, but he never really got to be the star that I thought that he was going to be. Booker, of course, would go on with the King Booker once he won the King of the Ring, and then he was able to win the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. I honestly thought that was a big surprise, but five-time Hall of Famer. Double Hall of Famer, because Booker made it and then Harlem Heat made it. I don't know. I didn't think that would happen. Peace out, everybody.